What if the human mind hasn't always worked the way it does today? What if there was once a time when people didn't experience themselves as separate observers, looking out at a silent material world, but instead felt themselves living inside a world that was conscious, alive, and filled with spiritual presence? And what if humanity didn't simply lose this way of seeing? What if we had to leave it behind? When most people hear the word Atlantis, they picture crystal temples beneath the ocean, advanced technology, flying machines, a great civilization destroyed by its own power. But Rudolf Steiner offered a very different and perhaps a far more profound interpretation. For Steiner, the deepest mystery of Atlantis was never what its people built. It was how they perceived reality. He described Atlantean humanity as possessing a kind of dreamlike clairvoyance, a natural spiritual perception through which people sensed forces, beings, and realities that modern consciousness can no longer ordinarily see. And yet, Steiner never suggested that we should try to return to that ancient state. He believed that losing it was part of our evolution, which raises a strange and fascinating possibility. Maybe humanity's spiritual blindness isn't the end of the story. Maybe it's the dark middle chapter of a much larger awakening. Before we go any further, I would like to share that Steiner's account of Atlantis belongs to his own spiritual, scientific worldview. He explained that his descriptions came from what he called the Akashic record, a spiritual record of humanity and the earth. So I invite you to listen to this version of events and simply notice what stirs in you and how it makes you feel. Because whether or not Atlantis existed exactly as Steiner described it, the deeper question stays the same either way. What have we lost in becoming modern? And what are we now being asked to regain? The world before the world became silent. Imagine waking into a world with the hard edges and sharp outlines that surround us now. The air is heavy with mist. The line between water and sky is never quite fixed. Mountains, forests, animals, people. None of it feels entirely separate. The landscape itself feels less solid, less settled, as though physical matter hasn't quite finished becoming physical yet. You don't look at a tree and see bark, leaves, cells, a species name. You feel the living force moving inside it. You don't meet another person and read them through their face, their clothing, their role, or their words. You sense something of their inner nature directly. Their feelings move through the air around them. Their intentions carry colour, atmosphere, presence. The invisible world isn't a belief discussed in temples or written in books. It's simply woven into the ordinary day. This is the kind of consciousness Steiner attributed to ancient Atlantis. He described the Atlanteans as living in a world where the physical was hazy and indistinct, while the spiritual, especially in sleep and altered states, remained wide open to them. What we would now call clairvoyance wasn't treated as a rare gift. It was simply part of being human. But this ancient clairvoyance was nothing like the conscious spiritual development Steiner would later teach. It wasn't self-directed. It was instinctive, dreamlike, often hard to tell apart from imagination, desire, or the pull of unseen forces moving through the world around them. An Atlantean may have perceived more than we do, but they didn't yet possess our sharp, individual sense of self. They were less cut off from spirit, and also less inwardly free, which is exactly where Steiner's account becomes more than a story about lost powers. Because in his view, humanity could never develop a true individual I while still immersed in that ancient perception. Something had to change. The Great Withdrawal. Picture a young child who feels no real boundary between herself and her mother. At first, that union feels safe. She hasn't yet learned to experience herself as separate. Her mother's presence feels almost like an extension of her own. But as she grows, a boundary begins to form. She discovers the word I. She develops her own preferences, her own thoughts, her own will. And although the separation aches, it's what makes her someone. Steiner believed something similar happened across the whole arc of human consciousness. Humanity gradually withdrew from its direct perception of the spiritual world so that the individual I could finally wake up. The world that once felt crowded with gods, spirits, and living forces slowly grew quiet. Objects gained sharper outlines. The mind grew more capable of comparison, calculation, logic, observation, judgment. And our attention turned more and more towards what could be seen. Steiner described certain post-Atlantean peoples as losing their nighttime spiritual sight, even as they gained sharper vision of the physical world by day. What looked like loss was also an achievement. We were learning to stand on our own, to think our own thoughts instead of simply receiving impressions from the spiritual world around us, to question, to discriminate, to choose. Because here is the deeper point. Even though ancient people may have perceived spiritual beings directly, Steiner argued their relationship to the unseen wasn't built on inner freedom the way ours can be. They perceived because they couldn't do otherwise. We, on the other hand, have been placed somewhere far stranger. We can doubt. We can reject the spiritual entirely. We can choose materialism and decide that consciousness is nothing but a byproduct of the brain, and that anything beyond the five senses is fantasy. And strangely, Steiner believed that possibility, the possibility of denial, was essential. Because love, faith, moral responsibility, spiritual knowledge, none of it can become truly free until it's no longer forced on us by direct perception. If the spiritual world were as undeniable as the chair beneath you, believing in it wouldn't take any freedom at all. It would just be unavoidable. So the old vision faded, the door closed, and humanity walked into a long spiritual night. The price of becoming an individual. But every evolutionary gain casts a shadow. As humanity developed intellectual consciousness, we gained independence, science, technology, a sharper sense of personal identity. We also began to feel more separate from nature, from each other, from the cosmos, and sometimes even from our own souls. The forest that once felt alive with presence became timber. The river became a resource. The body became a machine. Animals became commodities. Other people became categories, numbers, followers, consumers, competitors, obstacles between us and what we want. The world grew clearer to the eye and sometimes emptier to the heart. This is one of the great paradoxes in Steiner's picture of consciousness. Ancient humanity had spiritual connection without full individual freedom. Modern humanity gained freedom and often lost the felt sense of connection. We gained the power to think. We didn't always gain the wisdom to know what our thinking should serve. And maybe that's why so many people today feel stuck between two worlds. We don't want to throw away reason and science, evidence and critical thought. And yet something in us senses that a purely material account of life leaves something untouched. We feel awe under the stars. We notice coincidences that seem to mean something. We stand at the edge of a forest or beside the ocean, or hold a newborn baby, or sit beside someone who is dying, or we wake up from a dream that feels more real than real. And for a moment, the ordinary edges of life go thin. The world doesn't feel empty. It feels inhabited. It feels like something is looking back. And then, almost instantly, the analytical mind steps in. Was that real? Did I imagine it? Can I trust myself? Was that intuition or just what I wanted to believe? These are all good questions because Steiner never taught that we should try to recreate Atlantean clairvoyance. He believed our path runs forward, not backwards. The danger of looking backwards. It is tempting to romanticize ancient perception. We imagine that if we could just see auras, remember past lives, hear spiritual beings speak, or receive visions from other worlds, all our uncertainty would dissolve. We'd finally know who we are. We'd understand our purpose, and we'd never feel lost again. But Steiner warned again and again in so many different ways that spiritual perception without a clear, disciplined consciousness behind it can easily be misled. The Atlanteans saw spiritually, but not always freely and not always objectively. Their perception was tangled up with instinct, emotion, and forces they had no conscious way to examine. Which is exactly why clear thinking matters. We are not being asked to destroy the intellect. We are being asked to transform it. The intellect turns dangerous the moment it believes it's the only valid way of knowing. But intuition is just as dangerous the moment it refuses examination, discernment, humility, and responsibility. A feeling is not automatically a revelation. A vision is not automatically true. A strong emotional reaction is not necessarily divine guidance. And a teacher's certainty is never a guarantee of wisdom. True spiritual development asks something harder of us than simply opening up. It asks us to stay open without becoming gullible, to question without becoming cynical, to recognize the limits of the intellect without throwing reason away, to build an inner life sturdy enough to receive spiritual impressions without being ruled by them. That's a very different path than trying to recover an old psychic ability. It's the birth of conscious intuition. From instinctive vision to conscious perception. Steiner called ancient clairvoyance dreamlike because it existed before the modern ego had fully formed. But he also believed human consciousness could eventually re-enter the spiritual world. This time carrying all the clarity, self-awareness, and freedom the intellect had won for us. We're not meant to become Atlantean again. We're meant to carry that old capacity for spiritual perception into an entirely new kind of consciousness. One that can perceive and question. One that can receive and discern. One that can experience unity without losing individuality. And one that can step into the spiritual world without giving up its freedom. Steiner described this as a movement, from early dreamlike clairvoyance through self-conscious individuality, and eventually toward a new, wide-awake spiritual perception guided by the fully awakened I. The future perception won't arrive just because somebody wants it badly enough. It has to be cultivated through honesty, concentration, self-observation, moral effort, patience, and the quiet strengthening of thought. And maybe that's one of the most useful pieces of Steiner's teaching for us right now. Because modern spirituality often makes higher perception sound like a shortcut. Open your third eye, raise your vibration, activate your gifts, follow the sign. Steiner's approach was almost always more demanding than that. He believed that before we can clearly perceive anything beyond the ordinary senses, we first have to notice what is already distorting our perception from within. Our fears, our unhealed desires, our need to feel special, our hunger for certainty, our unexamined beliefs, resentment, projections, our longing to escape the difficulty of ordinary life. Because without self-knowledge, we might call something intuition when it's really anxiety. We might call something divine guidance when it's really just avoidance. And we might call something a spiritual attack when it's really just an uncomfortable truth that we don't want to face. We might grow so fascinated with hidden worlds that we quietly neglect the one right in front of us. Grounded spiritual perception doesn't pull us out of reality. It helps us meet reality more fully. The hidden purpose of the intellect. Maybe the intellect was never the enemy of awakening. Maybe it's the vessel being built to carry a more conscious kind of spiritual wisdom. The Atlantean, in Steiner's telling, lived inside spiritual perception, but hadn't yet developed our modern gift for abstract thought. We've since spent thousands of years learning to separate, define, compare, measure, analyze, learning to ask whether something is true instead of simply accepting whatever appears in front of us. And though that faculty can harden into pure materialism, it can also become an instrument of real discernment. The next stage of consciousness may not require silencing the mind. It may simply require making it transparent, not empty of intelligence, but free of compulsion, not stripped of reason, but no longer needing to dominate every experience, not endlessly producing noise and judgment, but finally still enough to receive something deeper. At that point, thought stops being a wall between us and the spiritual world. It becomes a doorway. The Atlantis within us. Maybe Atlantis isn't only behind us. Maybe it lives inside of us, a memory of consciousness from before the world went quiet. It lives in the part of you that senses meaning before you can explain it. It lives in the child who talks to animals, feels the personality of a tree, or knows someone is sad before a single word is spoken. It lives in the dream that carries more truth than an ordinary thought ever could. It lives in the sudden, quiet knowing that arrives without drama, without demand. But the evolution of consciousness doesn't ask us to simply recover those impressions. It asks us to meet them as adults, to listen without instantly believing, to stay curious without forcing an interpretation. to test what we receive against time, reality, conscious, and the effect it has on our lives. Does this make me more loving or more afraid? Does it make me more responsible or more dependent? Does it produce humility or spiritual superiority? Does it help me live my life or tempt me to escape it? Does it respect the freedom of other people? Does it leave behind clarity, patience, compassion, or urgency, confusion, obsession, and fear? Maybe genuine higher perception rarely feels spectacular. Maybe it feels quiet, clean, and steady. Maybe it doesn't flatter the ego or announce that you've been specially chosen. Maybe it simply shows you what love is asking of you right now in this moment. And maybe that's exactly where the ancient and the modern world finally meet. The ancient capacity to feel a living spiritual world. The modern capacity to stay awake, discerning, and free within it. The next evolution of consciousness. Steiner's account of Atlantis was never really a story about falling from perfection. It's a story about consciousness passing through necessary stages. We had to lose one kind of sight to grow another. We had to feel separation to discover individuality. We had to enter intellectual consciousness so that spiritual awareness could one day become conscious, chosen, and free, rather than simply given to us. And maybe we're standing at another threshold now. Our intellect has produced extraordinary knowledge and extraordinary technology, but it hasn't automatically taught us how to live wisely. We can talk to someone on the other side of the planet in a second, and yet still feel completely alone. We can map the entire brain and still not understand consciousness. We can reshape nature at will and still have forgotten how to listen to it. We can hold more information than any civilization in history, and somehow information alone has never told us what's sacred. So maybe the next step isn't rejecting the intellectual mind, and it isn't retreating into the old unconscious clairvoyance either. Maybe the next step is integration. To think clearly and feel deeply. To value evidence and stay open to mystery. To develop intuition without losing discernment. To become fully individual without forgetting we belong to something larger. And maybe, just maybe, to discover that the spiritual world never actually disappeared. Perhaps only the way we see it changed. Perhaps the silence was never abandonment. Perhaps it was an invitation to build the inner freedom that would one day let us turn back towards the spiritual world and say, not because we were forced to see, but because we chose to seek. I am ready to perceive again, but this time I will stay awake. We're going to move now into a meditation inspired by this teaching. It is simply an invitation to quiet the noise of the intellect, settle into your body, and open to a deeper kind of listening while staying grounded, discerning, and free. Awakening higher perception with grounded discernment. To begin, please find a comfortable position and allow yourself to relax. When you feel ready, gently close your eyes. There's nothing you need to see, nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to make happen. This isn't a test of your intuition or your spiritual ability. For the next few minutes, you're simply becoming quiet enough to notice what's already here. Take a slow, deep breath in through your nose and let it go softly through your mouth. Breathing in again and breathing out. Feel the weight of your body being held beneath you, the surface supporting your back, your hips, your legs, your feet. And let yourself recognize that you are here in this body, in this room, in this present moment. You are safe to be fully embodied. You are safe to stay grounded, even as your awareness opens. Take another deep breath in, and as you breathe out, soften your forehead. Relax the small muscles around your eyes. Let your jaw loosen. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Imagine each breath carrying you down, out of the busy activity of the mind, and into the quiet center of your being. There's nothing wrong with your thinking mind. You don't need to fight it or silence it by force. Just let each thought pass like a cloud drifting through a wide open sky. A thought may appear and leave. A memory may arise and dissolve. You remain here beneath it all, steady, present, and aware. Now bring your attention to the base of your spine and imagine a warm, earthy light beginning to form there. You might see it clearly or simply sense it. And if you feel nothing at all, that's completely fine too. There's no particular experience you're meant to have. Let that warm light move slowly down through your hips, your legs, your knees, your calves, all the way to the soles of your feet. And from the soles of your feet, imagine soft roots of light reaching down into the earth, through the floor, through the soil, through the old layers of stone beneath you, anchoring you gently into the living ground. Feel the steadiness beneath you. The earth doesn't ask you to leave your body to become spiritual. She invites you to inhabit it more fully. Quietly repeat inwardly, I am present in my body. I am supported by the earth. I am safe to perceive clearly. Take a gentle breath and let that grounding continue to hold you as your awareness moves now to the center of your chest. Imagine a small, warm flame glowing in your heart. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet flame, steady and clear. This flame is the part of you that recognizes truth through love, conscience, and inner integrity. It doesn't frighten you. It doesn't demand belief. It simply illuminates. With every breath, let this light expand just slightly through your chest. Quietly repeat, I open only to what serves truth. I open only to what serves love. I remain free within my own awareness. Now imagine the light of your heart rising. gently towards the center of your forehead. The warmth of the heart meeting the clarity of the mind, intuition and discernment, openness, receptivity, and freedom. Let the space behind your forehead grow quiet and spacious. You're not forcing your inner vision open. You're simply letting it rest. And in that restful space, imagine a calm indigo or violet light appearing, like the very first light of dawn. Soft, subtle, peaceful. Let it stay exactly as bright or as faint as it wants to be. There's nothing to search for. Instead, listen inwardly, not for a voice, not for a prediction, but for the quality of the silence itself. Within that silence, imagine you're standing beside a vast ocean before sunrise. The water is still, a fine silver mist rests along its surface. You can't see what lies beyond the mist, and you don't need to. Feel the solid earth beneath your feet. Hear the slow rhythm of the water. Breathe in the cool, clean air. Somewhere beyond that mist may rest the memory of ancient humanity, a time when the world was felt as alive, when the line between matter and spirit ran thinner than it does today. But you're not here to lose yourself in the past. You're here as the person you are right now, awake, embodied, and free. You can carry the gift of modern consciousness. You can observe. You can question. You can choose. And you also carry a quiet capacity to sense what can't always be explained through thought alone. As you stand beside this inner ocean, let those two capacities come into harmony. The mind doesn't need to overpower the heart. The heart doesn't need to reject the mind. They can serve one another. Quietly repeat, my mind is clear. My heart is open. My feet remain upon the earth. I welcome insight without forcing it. The heart doesn't need to reject the mind. They can serve one another. Quietly repeat, my mind is clear. My heart is open. My feet remain upon the earth. I welcome insight without forcing it. I receive guidance without surrendering my freedom. I trust what is quiet, patient, and loving. Now imagine a small sphere of clear white light forming between your heart and your mind. Place inside it any question, confusion, or uncertainty you are carrying. You don't need an answer right now. Just let the question rest inside the light. Say inwardly, may truth reveal itself in its own time. May I recognize what is real. May I realize what is projection, fear, or desire. May all insight lead me towards greater love, responsibility, and freedom. Let the sphere of light grow clear and still. Notice how it feels not to chase an answer, not to demand a sign, and not to force certainty. You're allowing wisdom to ripen. You're allowing truth to approach you in its own time, unhurried. Now the first rays of sunlight begin to spread across the ocean. The mist turns gold, and although you still can't see everything beyond it, there's no fear in you. You understand that spiritual development doesn't require you to know everything. It asks you to become trustworthy with what you're ready to know. Feel that golden light moving toward you across the water. Let it touch your forehead, bringing clarity. Let it touch your throat, bringing truthful expression. Let it enter your heart, bringing compassion. Let it move into your stomach, bringing calm. Let it flow down through your legs and feet, returning you to the earth. Quietly repeat, I don't need to return to the consciousness of the past. I am here to take part in the consciousness of the future. I think with clarity. I perceive with humility. I choose with freedom. I live with love. Begin to feel the surface beneath your body again. Notice the temperature of the room. Notice any sounds around you. Feel your hands and your feet. Let the roots beneath your feet gently withdraw until all of your energy is once again held comfortably inside your body. The light in your heart remains. The clarity in your mind remains. But you are fully here, present in ordinary life, because this is where your spiritual awareness is meant to serve you. In the conversations you have, in the choices you make, in how you treat your body, in how you meet another person's pain, in how you use your knowledge, your gifts, and your power. take one final deep breath in. And as you release it, say quietly within yourself, I am grounded. I am discerning. I am open. I am free. And whenever you're ready, slowly open your eyes. Maybe the deepest lesson in Steiner's vision of Atlantis is this: humanity's spiritual perception was never simply taken from us. It was transformed. We let go of the old dreamlike vision so we could develop individuality, reason, self-awareness, and freedom. And our task now isn't to throw those gifts away. It's to bring them into harmony with a renewed sense of the sacred. I genuinely love to hear from you in the comments below. Do you feel humanity is starting to move beyond a purely intellectual consciousness? And how do you tell the difference between real intuition and fear, fantasy or projection? If this exploration of Rudolf Steiner, Atlantis, and the evolution of consciousness spoke to you, please subscribe and join me for more journeys into the great mystics, ancient civilizations, spiritual transformation, and the hidden potential of the human soul. Just remember, awakening was never about escaping the human experience. It's about becoming more fully conscious within it. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next episode.